Every dawn, despite the relentless grip of pancreatic cancer, Claudette rose for a quiet rebellion. Her canvas, a community chalkboard, each chalked message born of pain and defiance, unknowingly became a lifeline for a lonely newcomer. Could simple words ignite hope and transform an entire street? The clock on the nightstand read 4:30 a.m., but for Claudette, time was no longer measured in hours. It was measured in the ebb and flow of pain, a coiled serpent of fire that lived deep in her abdomen. Pancreatic cancer, the doctors had called it, a thief in the night. This morning, the thief was particularly greedy, its grip a dull, grinding weight that whispered for her to stay in the warm embrace of her sheets, to surrender. She refused. With a slow, deliberate pivot, the 69-year-old retired librarian swung her legs over the side of the bed. The movement sent a jolt through her, sharp and electric, forcing a quiet hiss of air through her teeth. For a moment, she sat on the edge of the mattress, her hand pressed against the source of the fire, her eyes closed, navigating the simple geography of her bedroom by memory and sheer will. The pain wanted stillness, so she would move. It was a quiet rebellion, fought every single dawn in the silence of her small house in Maple Creek, Ohio. Dressed in her worn running sweats, she shuffled to the front door. The cool pre-dawn air that greeted her was a balm, a brief respite. Her run was no longer a run, not really. It was a slow, determined shuffle, a measured cadence of defiance against the body that was failing her. She made her way to the entrance of their quiet lane, to the large, slate-gray chalkboard mounted between two oak posts, the Sycamore Street Community Chalkboard. Her fingers, frail and trembling but sure, picked up a piece of white chalk from the wooden ledge. The soft scrape of chalk on slate was the only sound in the sleeping world. She paused, her breath misting in the cool air, and then she wrote, her cursive looping and elegant despite the tremor. To the young man who always plays his ukulele by the window, your music is this street's secret heartbeat. She stepped back, reading the words, a tiny, glowing ember of a message left against the vast, dark canvas of the world. Then, she turned and began her slow, painful journey down the street, disappearing into the gloom just as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky. From her kitchen window, Heather watched the old woman disappear. She'd been in Maple Creek for less than 2 months, and the solitary figure of the early morning runner had become a strange, silent fixture in her new, disjointed life. Heather, a 30-year-old single mother, worked as a remote legal transcriber. Her world was a headset and a screen, a monotonous loop of disembodied voices recounting accidents and disputes. The endless hum of her computer was the soundtrack to her days, a digital solitude that bled into her evenings. She and her 7-year-old son, Leo, were adrift in this new town, untethered from the familiar anchors of their old life. The friendly waves from neighbors felt like a performance she hadn't learned the lines for. At first, her observation of the runner was just a fleeting curiosity. Who was this woman who moved with such a stoic, almost painful deliberateness before the sun even considered rising? Then, one morning while walking a chattering Leo to the school bus stop, he tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, look, someone wrote on the big board." Heather had walked past the community chalkboard a dozen times, dismissing it as a relic for town announcements. But now she stopped and truly saw it. The message, written in that same elegant, looping cursive she would come to recognize, read, "Don't forget to look up. The clouds today are shaped like a ship setting sail." On the way back to the house, Heather found herself tilting her head to the sky. And there it was, a magnificent galleon-like cloud, masts and all, drifting across the pale blue. A small, involuntary smile touched her lips. From then on, checking the board became their ritual. The messages were small, polished gems of observation. To all the gardeners, your roses are plotting a grand crimson symphony. A special thank you to the garbage collectors. You bring order to our world before we've even had our coffee. I heard a new wind chime on Elm Street. It sounds like tiny, laughing bells. The words were a quiet revelation. They were intimate and anonymous, addressed to everyone and no one. For Heather, drowning in the sterile jargon of legal depositions, these sentences were like tiny sips of fresh, clean water. They were an antidote to the cold, impersonal conflicts she transcribed all day. They made her look closer at the world around her, prompting her to notice the specific shade of a neighbor's roses, to listen for the chime, to feel a flicker of gratitude for the unseen labor that kept their community humming. She didn't know the author's name, but this mysterious morning philosopher had become an essential part of her day, a small, reliable beacon in the fog of her loneliness. The messages made her feel seen, even though they weren't for her. They suggested a world of quiet connection, a community she desperately wanted to be a part of, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might one day find her place in it. A cold autumn rain began to fall on a Tuesday and didn't stop for 3 days. It was a miserable, gray drizzle that turned the lawns to mush and washed Sycamore Street clean. The chalkboard was a smear of ghostly white streaks, its daily wisdom erased. More unsettling for Heather, however, was the absence of the runner. The kitchen window view at dawn was empty. The street was still. The silence felt profound, a missing note in a song she hadn't realized she'd memorized. The daily expectation, the small spark of looking forward to the morning's message, had been extinguished, and its absence left a surprisingly deep void. On the fourth morning, the sun finally broke through. Heather's relief was palpable as she spotted the familiar figure emerging from the house down the street, but her relief quickly soured to concern. The woman's pace was slower than ever, each step a visible, monumental effort. The shuffle was now a fragile limp, a painful negotiation with the pavement. Impulse took over. Heather had never spoken to her, had only ever been a secret admirer of her words. But she couldn't just watch anymore. Grabbing a mug and quickly pouring some of the hot herbal tea she'd just brewed, she walked out the front door, her heart thumping with a nervous rhythm. "Excuse me," she called out gently, trying not to startle the woman. The old woman stopped and turned, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes were kind. "Good morning," she said, her voice a little breathless. I just wanted to say I've missed your messages on the board," Heather stammered, feeling suddenly foolish. "My son and we look for them every day. I'm Heather, by the way, I live just here." She gestured with the mug. "I brought you some tea, it's just chamomile." A slow, beautiful smile spread across the woman's face, transforming her tired features. "Claudette," she said, accepting the mug with a grateful nod. "That's about the kindest thing that's happened to me all week." They stood there for a moment, two strangers connected by chalk and kindness. Emboldened, Heather voiced her worry. "I was concerned when I didn't see you. I hope you're all right." Claudette took a slow sip of the tea, her gaze steady and direct. There was no self-pity in her eyes, only a calm, unvarnished honesty. "The rain is hard on the bones," she said simply. Then, after a pause, she added, "and the cancer doesn't much care for the cold." She said the word cancer as if it were a simple fact like the weather. "Pancreatic. The doctors have given me their timelines, but I'm on my own." The confession landed with the force of a physical blow. Heather felt the air leave her lungs. This woman, this source of daily light and poetic observation, was walking hand in hand with death. The sheer, staggering courage of it, to face the end not by retreating into darkness, but by actively, painstakingly creating light for others, was overwhelming. The words on the chalkboard were no longer just lovely phrases, they were acts of profound defiance. They were proof of life, whispered against the roar of its impending end. A powerful, urgent need to do something, anything. To honor that spirit surged through Heather, fierce and undeniable. Back inside her house, the hum of the computer felt intrusive, the legal jargon on her screen utterly meaningless. Heather stared out the window at the chalkboard, where Claudette, before continuing her slow walk, had managed to write a new message. "Even after the longest rain, the sun remembers where to find us." The words hit her differently now, imbued with a heartbreaking poignancy. She thought of the rain washing away the previous messages, a careless act of nature erasing these precious, defiant sparks. The thought was unbearable. Claudette's life was finite, her time measured in weeks or months, and soon her voice would be gone forever, just like the chalk on the slate. An idea, faint at first, then sharp and clear, pierced through her grief. What if the messages didn't have to disappear? What if Claudette's spirit, her relentless celebration of the small, beautiful things, could be made permanent? What if it could be seen by more than just the few who happened to walk past a chalkboard at the right time? The idea wasn't just about preservation. It was about amplification. It was about turning a whisper into a chorus. Fueled by a new sense of purpose, Heather pushed away from her desk. Her skills as a transcriber, her meticulous attention to detail and ability to organize information, suddenly felt useful for something that truly mattered. She began to plan. She designed a simple, heartfelt flyer on her computer. At the top, in a clean, bold font, she typed the title, "Let the Messages Run, a Sycamore Street Relay of Hope." The plan was straightforward but ambitious. She would invite every resident of their street to participate in a special event the coming Saturday. The concept was a relay, but not for speed. It was a relay of gratitude. Each participating household would be responsible for a small section of the sidewalk in front of their home. Heather would compile a list of all the Claudettisms she and Leo could remember, and encourage others to contribute their favorites. On the day of the event, the first person would start at the chalkboard, run or walk to the edge of their property, and inscribe one of Claudette's messages onto the pavement using a permanent, colorful marker. Then they would hand the marker to their next-door neighbor, who would do the same. The hope would literally travel down the street, house by house, message by message. It would be a tribute, a thank you, and a way to ensure that Claudette's light wouldn't just be a memory, but a permanent landmark. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Heather stood near the community chalkboard, a canvas tote bag filled with colorful permanent markers slung over her shoulder, her stomach a knot of anxiety. What if no one came? What if they thought her idea was sentimental or foolish? She had spent 2 days slipping her flyers into mailboxes, her heart pounding with each one, feeling like a hopeful child selling cookies door to door. At 9 a.m., the designated start time, there were only 3 people: Heather, Leo, and Mr. Henderson, an elderly widower from 4 houses down. Heather's heart sank. But then a young man with a ukulele case strapped to his back came jogging up the street. It was the musician from the window. He smiled shyly at Heather. "I'm Ben," he said. "I wouldn't miss this." Slowly, then all at once, they started to appear. The couple renowned for their prize-winning roses, a young family with a toddler in a wagon, a group of teenagers who usually spent their Saturdays skateboarding, looking slightly awkward but present. People emerged from their houses, blinking in the morning sun, flyers in hand. A quiet murmur of anticipation filled the air. Heather's anxiety melted away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming gratitude. She gave a brief, emotional speech, her voice trembling slightly as she explained the plan. She handed the first marker, a vibrant blue one, to Ben. He uncapped it, jogged to the start of the sidewalk, and knelt. In careful block letters he wrote, "Your music is this street's secret heartbeat. Thank you, CLAUDTTA." He then ran his short distance and handed the marker to the gardeners, a husband and wife in their 60s. They chose a bright red marker and wrote, "Our roses plot their symphony for you." They passed their marker to the next family, and the chain reaction began. The street transformed. It became a living, breathing river of color and emotion. The scrape and squeak of markers on concrete was the day's soundtrack. Laughter rang out as neighbors conferred on which message to write. People brought out coffee and donuts to share. The teenagers, who Heather had worried would be too cool to care, were meticulously drawing ornate frames around their chosen quote. Even after the longest rain, the sun remembers where to find us. Leo, tasked with being the official marker runner, darted between groups, supplying fresh colors. Late in the afternoon, when the entire length of Sycamore Street was a vibrant tapestry of words, Heather went to get Claudette. She helped her into a wheelchair she had borrowed, her own hands shaking with the significance of the moment. She pushed her out onto her front porch. Claudette's eyes widened. She slowly scanned the scene before her. From the foot of her driveway, stretching all the way down the sun-drenched street, was a mosaic of gratitude. Her words, her quiet, daily offerings, were now emblazoned on the very foundation of the community she loved. They were permanent. They were celebrated. She couldn't take a single running step, but in that moment her spirit was sprinting, dancing, soaring down the entire length of the street. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were not tears of pain or sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked at Heather, her face illuminated by a smile so radiant it seemed to outshine the sun itself. It was the smile of a soul that knew it had been truly, deeply seen. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting a golden glow over the street, an impromptu block party bloomed on Claudette's front lawn. People brought out lawn chairs and coolers, sharing sandwiches and stories. The invisible walls between houses, the polite but distant nods, had dissolved in a shared act of love. The air was filled with the hum of conversation and the gentle strumming of Ben's ukulele. Claudette sat in her wheelchair in the center of it all, wrapped in a warm blanket, a queen holding court. She was no longer just the quiet old woman who ran in the mornings. She was the neighborhood's poet laureate, its quiet hero. Neighbors she had only ever waved to now approached her, not with pity, but with reverence, sharing how a specific message of hers had brightened a difficult day or changed their perspective. She listened to each one, her smile never fading. Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening grew cooler, Heather knelt beside her wheelchair. Claudette reached out and took her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Her eyes, clear and bright, locked onto Heather's. "You gave my words legs that will never grow tired, child," she whispered, her voice raspy but full of a profound peace. "You heard the part of me that I thought no one else could hear. Thank you." It wasn't just a thank you for the event. It was a deeper acknowledgement, a recognition of the soul-deep connection that had formed between them. For Heather, it was a validation that healed a part of her she hadn't known was so broken. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was the one who had helped a community see its own heart. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Claudette passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was not a somber affair. It was a celebration. The small chapel was overflowing with the residents of Sycamore Street. Ben played his ukulele, a soft, hopeful melody. One by one, people stood up and didn't share memories of Claudette, but instead recited their favorite messages from the sidewalk. They spoke of clouds shaped like ships, of the symphony of roses, of the courage it takes to find the sun after the rain. Her words had become their eulogy, her spirit a living presence in the room. She had left them a legacy written not in a will, but on the very pavement they walked on every day. Several months later, the first green buds of spring were appearing on the trees of Maple Creek. It was 5:30 a.m., and the air was cool and damp with the promise of a new season. Heather tied the laces of her own running shoes, the movements now familiar and practiced. She was no longer just a legal transcriber or a newcomer. She was a runner, a neighbor, a friend. She and Leo, now confidently riding his bike, set off down the street. The morning was quiet, but it was a comfortable, familiar silence. Neighbors, already out walking their dogs or getting their newspapers, waved to her, calling her by name. "Morning, Heather." "Go get 'em, Leo." The greetings were easy and genuine, threads of connection woven into the fabric of her morning. They made their way down Sycamore Street. The colorful messages on the sidewalk had faded slightly from the winter snow and spring rain, but they were still there, indelible and clear. They were a permanent part of the landscape now, a testament to the woman who had taught them all to look a little closer. Each phrase was a landmark, a memory, a piece of a legacy of light. When they reached the community chalkboard at the entrance to their lane, Heather stopped. She picked up a piece of fresh white chalk. At the very top of the board, above the space for the daily message, she wrote a new, permanent heading in her own neat script. It was a dedication and a mission statement, in honor of Claudette. Then underneath it, She wrote today's message, her own small offering to the world. The sun is up. What beauty will you add to the world today? As she and Leo continued on their way, a new day dawning over Maple Creek, the cycle of kindness, sparked by one woman's defiant courage, began again. The message was running.